Hello, my name is Connor.
And I'm Jason.
And you are listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast. So, Jason, you grew up in the Church of Christ, very steeped in it, and I'm sure anybody who's listened for any amount of time can kind of, if you didn't grow up in the Church of Christ, you can kind of pick up on what things came alongside that. Usually, a lot of times, kind of isolation and the idea that, hey, we've got all the right teaching in house, we've kind of got it all figured out. And so, Jason, when was like the first time, or one of the first times where you either learned something really valuable from somebody that was outside of your, church stream, or you were really impacted, or you noticed something that was later beneficial for you?
You used a word there, isolation, and I wouldn't have used that word, but that really describes me. Right out of high school, I went to a Church of Christ college for a year, and I noticed all the things that bugged me about our heritage, but I didn't really do anything. I'm not a proactive person, apparently. But when I was in the Army, there was a series of things that happened. But this one lieutenant, Lieutenant Clanton was his name, he had been a member of the Church of Christ and was part of something else, which in my world was he was lost.
He's a witch.
Yeah, I mean, he was not to be trusted. But he was a lieutenant, and I was a private, and so I didn't have much ground to stand on, but he was incredibly kind, incredibly patient, and the most interested in my walk with God that I've ever experienced, I think. I don't know if I've ever experienced a person that was so overtly interested in how I was connecting with God, and it scared me, offended me. He would. I mean, these weren't like horrible questions. It was like, Jason, how's your relationship with Jesus? I'm like, how dare you ask me that? I was so offended, especially coming from a obvious, a heretic that I'm talking to. But really, he owed me nothing. He was a lieutenant, I was a private, but was really interested. And so as I listened to him, he had a really good handle on most of the teaching I received, and he wasn't against, all the teaching, but he started to open the door to, there are some things that you've been told are the Bible that aren't the Bible. And it was the first time I remember, and I mean, I was 20, 21 years old, but it's the first time I remember thinking, this might be the problem I've had all the time. Like, I was super critical. I thought I was critical of the Bible. I thought I was critical of God and of Jesus, and I am at times critical of God in terms of I think you should do things differently. But a lot of my cynicism came from being raised in inconsistency. But I didn't even know it until he shared that. He shared his journey with me. And added to that, I'd been with a lot of Christian leaders, and they were very interested in me doing things the right way. But they didn't have any overt interest in my walk with God. So that made a huge impact on me that I didn't even realize at the time.
Oh, that's a perfect way to end it, I think, especially for what the passage that we're going to be talking about today, and just specifically that difference, we'll bring it up later, between the religious experiences that you had before, where people concerned about how you were doing religion, and this person was concerned about how you were and how your relationship with God was. And man, just a lot of maturity. And you think about the seeds that were planted in that have sprouted in you for 20, 30 years later, and in the people that you love and you minister. That's just a really cool, powerful testimony to that person's experience. And it's not like it was now, Church of Christ, 30 years ago, it's much different. Taking that step away is much different than it is now. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about a passage in Mark chapter 9, just a few short verses, starting in verse 38. It says this: "Teacher," said John, "we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we told him to stop, because he was not one of us." "Do not stop him," Jesus said, "for no one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. For whoever is not against us is for us. Truly I tell you, anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to the Messiah will certainly not lose their reward." So, Jason, what amazes you about this passage?
What jumps out at me from this, and this is a really challenging passage, there is another passage in a very different context where it seems like Jesus says the opposite. I don't know if we processed that passage before, but I just want to point out there is another passage where he says what at face value seems the opposite. I'm going to go ahead and spoil it and say it's not the opposite. But anyway, specifically about this passage, what amazes me about this passage is the phrase, "For whoever is not against us is for us." And the reason I've always thought opposite. Whoever's not for us is against us. But in order for me to figure out if you're against me, I have to listen to you. I have to figure it out, because I don't know if you're against me because you do something different than me. If you really boil it down, because when Jesus said something, it's not incidental. I say all kinds of incidental nonsense that if you recorded every word and you ask me, I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't really mean it that way, this kind of thing. But Jesus is very intentional. And so in order to know that dynamic, you have to assess, are they really against me? I have perceived anybody that thinks differently than me as against me pretty much all my life. But he's saying, no, let's determine first, and go back to that. So that whole idea, you're assessing whoever's not against you is for you. That is a line of thinking. That's a linear dynamic that I do not appreciate. I don't process it that way. I think you need to establish being for me, and then I'll know you're for me. And usually the way I establish whether you're for me is, do you agree with me? Do you make me feel comfortable? But this is saying you need to assess whether they're against you. And if they're not against you, they are for you. Which means against, and maybe this differentiation is useful, against is not, how do I say this? Against is not disagreeing. Against carries that sense of, I am pushing back on you intentionally. I'm against you. I don't just have a difference of opinion. I don't have a different political party or a different church I go to or a different ideology. This is me. To me, when I hear that, if I'm against someone, that's different than me ignoring someone or not liking someone or being different than someone. So that totally redefines, and I don't even know how far that the implications go, but that totally redefines how I've thought about this concept of assessing who is for me. And the question should start with, well, who is actively against you?
Yeah, man, there's a lot of groundbreaking stuff there. You said something about kind of the order of operations of which we determine whether somebody's like on our side or somebody's a part of our group or somebody is for us or against us. And it makes me wonder, do we have a well thought out, drilled in idea or formula, not a formula, because I hate formulas because math is dumb. It's not dumb. It provides many wonderful things, and I'm glad there are a whole bunch of smarter people that know that sort of thing can do that. But I think about when I was a kid, and you have the order of operations in mathematics, and it's just drilled into you over and over again. Here are the rules for how you do things. Here are the rules for how you when you multiply, when you add, when you subtract in an equation. And I do really wonder with this specifically is if we are looking at somebody as an enemy, if we are going about the process of determining, man, is this somebody who's actively trying to work against me, or is this somebody who is ultimately passive or on my side or whatever it may be? If we are, I don't think I'd ever realized the catastrophic effects that doing the equation in the wrong order could have. Because if you do an equation out of order, you're not going to come anywhere close to the right answer. And I'm not saying the equation and the equation is the exact same every single time in all circumstances, but this seems like such a marginal thing for me, but you talking about that really makes me think about, man, do I treat this seriousness with as much teaching and gravity that Jesus seems to give it here?
Yeah. And I think a lot of this is so subconscious. I walk in and you're wearing a t-shirt, and this is true, like I was describing 20 years ago. You're wearing a T-shirt that espouses something I don't like. It could be you go to a church I don't go to, or it's a Budweiser shirt, and I think all drinkers are in spiritual trouble, or whatever it is. Something as simple as a shirt. I immediately, without thinking about it, based on the way I've been raised and the way I experienced life early on, I will immediately say, this person I've got to be careful with, or maybe this person is against me, And I will make that assessment before I even say a word, before they even say a word. Now, ideally, I'm talking to the person, in so many myriad situations this comes up, but I'm talking to the person, I'm getting a feel for them. But what if you came in to every relationship, said, this person is for me? And I'm not talking about not being wise and we're told to be shrewd as serpents and gentle as doves, but it's the idea of, the fact that they are coming across different than me, mm-hmm. that is not against. Yeah. And to redefine, and this may only pop for me, but it really does, because I have to work really hard when somebody says something critical of me or presents in a way that I think it's critical of me to just be kind. Like, that is spiritual discipline for me, and that's not an honorable thing to say. But reorienting my mind based on this passage, wait a minute, they're going to prove I need to let them prove that they're against me. You know what I mean? And I just wonder how much more I would learn, because when I think you're against me and you're not, I shut you out. But how much more I would learn and really participating in Christ as a bridge builder. He tears down walls. He's trying to connect people. And I think the way I approach things sometimes is the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm trying to protect myself because they're against me. And so I don't get to participate in what God is doing and connecting me with, especially people that are different than me.
Yeah, I love what you had to say there. And I think what's even to pull a little bit more of a thread out of what you were talking about there is this person that the disciples are upset with is doing a good thing, right? They're doing something that is good, and the acclaim, the fame is going to the name of Jesus. And like, to further your T-shirt illustration along, it's not as if you were like going in and somebody was wearing a Budweiser shirt, but somebody was wearing a shirt that said, whatever. Man, I'm trying to think of like a good like theological statement that is like perfectly innocuous. It'd be like if somebody walked in and somebody's wearing a shirt that said Jesus is awesome, and you were like, yeah, but isn't he also the Savior? But isn't he also, the Son of God?
Right.
Aren't you also a wretched sinner? Like that. It's that sort of mindset of you see this you see these good things, but it's like, because, and you see this a lot in modern circles, but because there's not these what's the word I'm looking for? These qualifications, these qualifications to everything that you say, that it inherently makes what this person is doing or saying invalid. And there is a big part, and it's so much more freedom, because you could walk in, maybe as a Church of Christ, 20-something-year-old that's been awakened to like, hey, maybe the other people aren't going to hell, but it's still kind of a little bit kooky. If you can walk into a room with a whole bunch of different people who believe that Jesus is Lord, but ultimately don't go to a Church of Christ, like, if you can walk in with the mindset or the reality that, hey, they might not agree with the direct like mission statement of my church, or we might tweak words here or there, but still like they're for me and I can be for them. That changes the mindset so often. And oftentimes, and now we find ourselves, I think, in a place that's like, most people can kind of get there. And so the differences become much more subtle in terms of, maybe we're not the one going to Jesus being like, hey, did you hear they're casting out demons? But the way that we're positioning our heart is a way that is ultimately shutting ourselves off from the possibility of them being allies or friends, and that's how they present as enemies. And so there's a lot there. There's a lot of depth there.
Yeah, and I think, to use a specific example, we have had events at our church building where we're just trying to communicate to the neighborhood that, hey, we're a place that people that think differently can come together. We're not in agreement, but so we will have meals and invite the community. And I've sat at tables with Muslims and Hindus, and we're talking about how they parent. Like, we're just eating a meal and talking just what's coming up for them. And I'm learning stuff through them of God. Now, that's not saying I believe they're going to heaven based on their belief system. What it is saying is God can teach through anything. For goodness sake, he taught through these wise men that came to Jesus, and they were not Jewish people. They were not God's people. He taught through kings that were evil. He taught through all kinds of things. And I think we shut off a way that he communicates with us through that. Furthermore, I think, who's to say that God's not trying to build a bridge there? But if I start with, oh, you're a Muslim, then I'm against you, or you're against me, then I can't see the for you part that may be there. When I say somebody is for me, that doesn't mean they're saved. All it's saying is Jesus is just making this case, and he demonstrates this, because keep in mind, every interaction he had with a Gentile from his upbringing was a sinful interaction. Like, he should have only been saying, you're evil, I'm out of here. Or if you have to do business, okay, But him expressing love and kindness and care to these Gentiles, he's way off. And so he's showing, despite the fact that they are not saved people at that time, he's saying, look, I'm for you, and I'm not gonna assume you're against me from the start. And I think that's, I mean, I go on and on about it, but yeah, I think that's intriguing. So what amazes you?
Yeah, I think it is so important to recognize the two facts that we have here are that this person who's, casting out demons is not a direct disciple of Jesus. He's not on the inner circle. And the other fact is that he's casting out demons in Jesus' name. And so if this person is doing this one really good thing, but they're not part of the group, and they're being shut down for that good thing, then what's the message that they receive about Jesus? What's the like you're talking to a Hindu or Muslim or an atheist, and you're talking about things that we all care about, things that God all wants us to flourish in, whether it be parenting or love or any of these things that most people can agree upon. And if you can't if you can't even for a moment stop and dwell and meet people in the good, if their good isn't even acceptable. If their good isn't even acceptable to you, why would they think that their whole selves is acceptable to Jesus?
Mm-hmm. That's outstanding. Really outstanding. So what amazes you?
Yeah, so I love the Jesus again is so understanding. I feel like if this was me, I would be so mad at my disciples. I'd be so frustrated that they're othering this person. They are trying to stop. They're trying to have more demons in the world, in people, than there would be without this person. And yet at the end of it, Jesus, he's not mad. He just says, don't stop him. And then he goes on to say, truly I tell you, anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to Messiah will certainly not lose their reward. And there could be some nuance there that I'm not picking up on, but there's still this it's so funny. The disciples get something so wrong here. They get something so wrong just a couple verses earlier, and still they maintain this place of reverence, this place of honor, this place of importance for Jesus. And I guess I grew up with the idea that God was this father figure, or Jesus was this father figure that, oh man, I really messed up, and so I really messed up, so I've got to go. I was at the adult table. Now I got to go sit back at the kids table. I got to work my way up and show that I really belong. And sometimes maybe we see something of that sort of analogy with Jesus' interaction with the disciples. But here there's just so much. I feel like for me, it'd be so simple to be. It'd be so simple, just not even on purpose, but just with just easily without meaning to, just be easy for Jesus to make make the disciples feel implicitly that they have to go earn their way back up for the favor of Jesus. And just the fact that isn't the case is amazing to me.
Yeah, that is something that is I think so complicated in my own mind of how do I notice something that is wrong, speak to it, and fully reassure the person this is good, because they've already done it. They're not asking, should we have said? Like, he doesn't even say, now go back to them and tell them you're sorry, and you know what I mean? It's an odd thing, and you can't compare this one-to-one with parenting, clearly, because these are grown men and this kind of thing, but there is that dynamic. I will ask often, how does this affect my parenting? So I notice my kid's doing something, and obviously if your kid is 1 versus your kid being 22, there's a very different dynamic there. But once my kid is acting independently on whatever level, how do I come alongside in that way? I was working with a couple recently, and there's some known sin among them, and they're very proactive about, we don't want the devil to get a foothold here. But then how do I bring it up without feeling like I'm judging or nagging? And I thought that is a wonderful question, but Jesus is so good at it. Like he totally corrects them and then leaves them reassured. At least that's the way I read it. And I just think that's a beautiful thing I want to keep praying into for me, of how to do that.
Yeah, no, for sure. That ability to correct and reassure, an underappreciated aspect of the brilliance of Jesus and love that Jesus displays. So what perplexes you?
There are actually several things that perplexes me. I've been thinking about which, number one, I probably would have sided with John. And part of that's because Acts 19, there's the 7 sons of Sceva or whatever, they are healing people in Jesus' name, and they get beaten by a demon. So I'm like, what's the difference here and there? I think honestly, it's kind of simple, and it's actually what you referred to. I'm having a trouble, and you may be able to help me with this, but in 41, I don't necessarily like. I wouldn't have expected 41 to follow 40. Like clearly, I've heard many times anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name, will certainly not lose their reward. But I haven't just contextualized it in this context, and I don't quite understand the flow of thinking here. And you referenced an amaze, but so maybe that this is really on. You've got this in your mind, but it just seems it seems like non-connected to me. It's like, and here's another thing, because in my mind, the emphasis is on, should we correct people that do these things and they're not in our community? And he's saying no. So he does deal with that a little bit, but then it gets confusing because he says, who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to the Messiah. So does that mean if I give a cup of water to somebody in Jesus' name, but they don't belong to the Messiah, it seems to almost be negating what he said previously. Because initially they're like, they're not part of the Messiah, and he's like, yeah, no, don't judge them by that. And then he's like, but if they give you a cup of water because you belong to me, then they won't lose their reward. It seems like he's correcting himself, and I'm sure I'm not. It's simply a lack of understanding on my part, but it perplexes me.
It is really perplexing. So yeah, I think there's probably some sort of cultural thing that maybe we could do some research and figure out. Maybe we will next week. But I wonder if the key phrase, and again, just wonder, it's not me pronouncing anything. The key phrase is belong. It feels like the theme of this little passage here is the idea of belonging and what it means to belong to God, to Jesus, to the movement, to good things. And so is this a part of the disciples thought that this guy casting out demons was bad because they didn't perceive that he belonged in the same way that they did. Then Jesus comes in and he corrects them. He corrects their thinking. And would their natural response be to that? Would they naturally give way to the way that they previously thought and go, okay, well, now I'm bad. I don't belong because I didn't get it right. And so is this a part of, does it flow? And I'm just kind of theorizing here. Is the reason it flows from this is because it starts off with the disciples having a wrong view of what it means to belong to the Messiah, and Jesus trying to wrap all this up together. I don't know. How does any of that sound to you?
Yeah, I can hear that. And you bring up that point that we receive this as teaching, and it is. He's a teacher. But this is also relationship building. It's not simply corrective. It is also it's in the context of their relationship. So I think it's really legitimate to say there are parts that, because we can't see the facial expressions and we can't hear the intonation, and we know from the Bible what happened before this, but we don't know the emotional dynamic. Like, how much is your reaction right now based on what happened 3 days ago? So we don't know those things. But I do agree with your previous point. I think it's of reassurance. I really do think it's of reassurance, and I think pointing out belonging is the through line throughout this. I still would have trouble, like if you press me to teach on why. Basically, I guess the crux of it is, if I had a question, is am I only blessed if I give cups of water to people that belong to the Messiah, or am I blessed to give cups to everybody? You know what I mean?
Sure.
As long as I'm doing it on behalf of Jesus.
Interesting. Yeah, and then I wonder if Jesus. I totally understand where you're coming from, but then I wonder if Jesus' response would be like, "Hey, are you doing the equation out of order again? Are you
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that could be. It could not be. Yeah. So again, it kind of gets to the word, and maybe Jesus would have the exact same response to me as I just kind of gave as a hypothesis to what you just said as your perplexion. But in verse 39, the logistics of, for no one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. How does that look? How does that play out? What when Jesus says moment, what does he mean there? Bad about me. What does that extend to? Does that extend to actions? Does that extend to thoughts about God? Does that extend to that statement right there is so. I don't know how big. I do not know how big of a deal to make out of it. If that makes sense. Like, is this something that like is a teaching of Jesus true and it's kind of singular in this moment, or does this have much bigger implications to my life? Because if it has really massive implications, like if it's bigger than what I've previously attributed to, that would have massive ramifications for how I view my life and I view any spiritual life, really. So yeah, I'm very perplexed by that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm trying to think, and I've not researched this, but I think it's an interesting phrase, in the next moment, as far as when you talk about, I don't remember a time Jesus spending much time on sequential dynamics, like if you do this and then you do this in the next moment. This seems unique to me, you know? So the way I read this is, if I'm doing a miracle and I'm focused on Jesus, and this is my assumption about what was different between this and Acts 19, where the guys get beaten and thrown out of the house, is that he is saying these people, this person who was Cassie, who was doing this miracle, he was doing it specifically because he believed in Jesus. Yes, he wasn't one of the 12 disciples, but he was somebody they didn't know who had heard about Jesus and for whatever reason was inspired, to believe he could do that. That's another dynamic. Is how did he know? Jesus tells the apostles beforehand, you're going to go out and you're going to do these things. In like Luke 9, he says, I'm sending you to do this thing. But before that, there's no indication they were naturally or organically just picking this up, And so it's interesting. That's a whole nother rabbit trail is, when did this guy think, I'm going to do that too? As long as I believe in Jesus. And
does that take more faith than the disciples who were, directly told?
Exactly. And then the technique of it, like how do you do that? So did he see Jesus do it once? Did he see Jesus do it once and then he just felt compelled? The Spirit was working on him? I don't know. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But there is, to me, I'm basing on an assumption is, when I'm doing something to you right now on behalf of loving Jesus, giving you a cup of water, for example, I won't in the next second then curse Jesus. It doesn't mean I won't curse Jesus 10 minutes later. So I wonder if that's sequential in the next moment, that is just so specific about that dynamic. Because I think, I believe if you ask Jesus, is there ebb and flow in our sense of connection to you? Like, is that natural to feel deeply connected and full of faith and then a short while later not to feel that way? I think he would have said, welcome to your humanity. That's why I'm so special, because I never pause from asking God. Yeah. And humans always do. So I don't know if that explains it, but I do wonder about it. It's a little bit peculiar language versus what I'm accustomed to seeing.
Thank you for listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast. Grace, peace, and love.